Hello everyone, my name is Korosh Erfani and I am sociologist and the writer of the book Infinityism. Infinityism is about a philosophical theory according to which we can get any production we want, any material we want, any resources, and as much as we want if we know how to treat the infinitude that is going on inside and within the matter. So in order to do so, we need a theoretical basis, and we are trying to elaborate Infinitylogy as the theoretical framework for the theory of infinitism. So in order to do so, we need a methodology, a general methodology for Infinitylogy, and that's why we are trying to see what are the theoretical sources for doing so. One of the sources that we found, and until now we find very interesting things inside, is effectively this book that is called Against Method from Professor Paul Feyerabend, who is an Austrian philosopher of science, and who is suggesting in this book that we should not be the prisoner of the established methods, and that we can effectively change and modify the different aspects of methodology in order to arrive to a useful truth, right? So we started the lecture of this book, and until now we made the introduction and the chapter 1, and we are working on the chapter 2. For the first part of the chapter 2, we got some points that I would like to review before going over the remaining part of the chapter 2. The point that we have are the following. We kept this interesting point from the chapter 2 of this book. The first one, in order to innovate in science, we should be able to put in question the well-established facts. We should be able to do so. We should dare doing so. The second point is nothing indicates that having doubt about the well-established theories will be harmful, right? So which means that having any doubt about these theories that are so-called well-established, well-known, could be useful, right? So why not? The third point is all the ideas and counter-inductive thoughts and theories will be participating in the construction of the final scientific output, somehow, somewhere, and to some extent. So which means that we should believe in the usefulness of any idea, right? Any counterinductive thoughts or theories, and that could help us to finally get a very interesting outcome at the end. So that's why we shouldn't be afraid about this, and we should try to make the different kinds of idea in order to see how they can help us improve the construction of the new ideas we want to suggest or to conclude at the end of our scientific work. And finally, the fourth point is a more constructive attitude regarding the weaker alternative theories will be to help them improve instead of calling them off, right? So why we should try to cancel all the weaker ideas, weaker theories, why we should not help them to get better, and then using this better off situation of that theory for what we are doing. These are the points that we got from the first part of the chapter 2, and let's keep going in our lecture in order to see what could be other interesting point to uphold. Now we are here. The second counter rule, which favors hypotheses inconsistent with observations, facts, and experimental results, needs no special defense, for there is not a single interesting theory that agrees with all the known facts in its domain. So which means that any theory you take as the central one in a given field, in a given domain, that theory will include some of the interesting facts regarding that subject, but not all of them, right? So that's why when we are suggesting something that looks like inconsistent with observation, with the well-established fact, or with the experimental result or empirical works, we should not be worried about that. Why? Because we know that there are many other facts that are not included in these observations or the experiments, for example, or the empirical undertakings. So we can have an idea about a more spread coverage of a theory when we start to suggest the things that are not consistent with that theory, right? And then we open the horizon to get into account other facts, other data, other realities, and other observations. So the question is therefore not whether counter-inductive theories should be admitted into science, right? So why we should not admit the counter-inductive theories in what we are doing? So this is not question. The question is rather whether the existing discrepancies between theory and fact should be increased or diminished, or what else should be done with them. So you see that on the contrary of the idea that we have been told in the scientific education at a school or university, that when there is a discrepancy between the admitted theory and the new theories that we are suggesting, we should think automatically or mechanically about how effectively we should resolve somehow this problem, this lag between the well-established theory and our suggestion. But what Dr. Feyerabend is suggesting is that we don't need to be afraid about that. We don't need to try automatically and mechanically to do so. We can think about if this discrepancy can be or should be even increased, instead of decreased. Sometimes we need effectively to diminish this discrepancy, but sometimes, on the contrary, we could try to increase that, to deepen that, and then to see how it could be the outcome, how useful could be the upshot of this operation of increasing or diminishing or something else. What should be done with this discrepancy should be an open question. And then we can have the flexibility in our methodology and in our research work. Now, it says that to answer this question, it suffices to remember that observational reports, experimental results, factual statements either contain theoretical assumptions or assert them by the manner in which they are used. So there is nothing absolute in what we are doing when we are working on an empirical experience, for example, right? There is nothing sacred, if you want. So, which means that we know that there are always the assumption, right? These are the theoretical assumption, or there are the assertion. But we should know that we are just using the words, the ideas, to present them in this way. It means that there is no external reality that could emphasize on the absolute character of what we are saying. This is our work, this is our imagination, this is our way to formulate that. And these formulations should not be presented in an absolute way, in an absolute manner. There is nothing absolute, right? Which means that even though we call them, you can see that the factual is in the quotation mark. Why? Because it was the author, Dr. Feyerabend, wants to emphasize on the fact, on this reality that even when we are talking about the facts, the factual statement, even the factual statement are the result of our formulation, our assumption, right? So that's why our habit of saying the table is brown, when we view it under normal circumstances with our senses in good order, but the table seems to be brown when either the lighting conditions are poor or when we feel unsure in our capacity of observation, expresses the belief that there are familiar circumstances when our senses are capable of seeing the world as it really is, and other equally familiar circumstances when they are deceived. So when we are expressing a factual reality, we should know that there are parameters that are playing in the statements that we are expressing, right? And these parameters could be either material, physical, spatial, and external, or could be psychological and coming from our mind or our senses. And in all circumstances, we should be aware that there are these elements that are participating in the equation, and then we formulate the final outcome based on the participation of all these deficiencies, right? Deficiencies of lighting, for example, of the space or location in which we are viewing this table. The fact that how our senses are able to see that. So all of these possibilities and elements are participating to this formulation, which means that our formulation, according to which the table is brown, doesn't have anything as absolute, anything that as purely consistent with the reality, right? The compliance of our statement with the reality is relative. And we don't forget that, right? So, That's why it says it expresses, our formulation expresses the belief that some of our sensory impressions are veridical while others not, right? Some of our sensory impressions are such that we think that it couldn't be otherwise, it shouldn't be otherwise, right? While it's not the case of others. We also take it for granted that the material medium between the object and us exert no distorting influence, and that the physical entity that establishes the contact, for example light, carries a true picture. We know that's not true. We know that the quantum physics experiences that right now are telling us that based on our position, based on the fact that are viewing something or not, the reality could be different. So that's why there wouldn't be anything that can guarantee for us, can grant for us the total neutrality of the material medium between the object and us, right? There is nothing that can grant that. It's not granted, right? So all these are abstract and highly doubtful assumptions which shape our view of the world without being accessible to a direct criticism. So you see that the abstraction is there even when we are talking about the most factual data, right? The most physical reality. And we cannot forget about the role of the abstraction in the creation of the assumptions, right? And these assumptions are highly doubtful. And we can put in question easily this assumption and get some other ideas about an external phenomenon, for example, right? So usually we are not even aware of them, and we recognize their effects only when we encounter an entirely different cosmology, right? So we are in our comfort zone, and we go with our assumptions, presuppositions, and we think that everything is fine and we are dealing with reality as it is, while it's not the case. And that's why we cannot discover that until we have effectively another cosmology in front of us, right? So when we have this cosmology, what happens? Prejudices are found by contrast, not by analysis. So let me open a little parenthesis here in order to explain something regarding my own experience when I suggested the idea of the infinitism. So until now, we believed seriously on the ending character of everything, right? Which means that we believe seriously on the limitness of all the resources, for example, right? And we established our society, our economy, our relationship, and also our civilization in general based on this idea that the resources are ending. At a given moment, any resources will end and we cannot have any more. So that's why we integrated the concept of the scarcity in our economy, and based on this economy, all the social relationship and all the social structures had been funded. And we got this current world and the disastrous situation that we have in the 21st centuries. A lot of environmental issues, social inequality, economic inequality, the possibility of war, climate change, and putting the world in a catastrophic situation. Why? Because we started to believe in a cosmology that gives us the idea of the reality of limitness of the resources. We believe that all the resources will be finished one day. So that's why we cannot use them rationally. We should try to have the majority of these resources for the minority, and this minority should try to prevent, the majority to have access to these resources, and then we get this ugly world that we have with, class society, social inequality, and poverty for the majority, and the too much wealth for a minority. So we are going in this historical path, for thousands and thousands of years. Now the question is, could we start thinking differently? Yes, but how? In the book Infinitylogy, in the version, in the English version, and also in the Persian version, I try to establish the idea that what about that the reality is something else, that there is no end, there is no limit for the resources that we need to create a very prosperous economy and very ideal society. What about having everything we want, as much as and as many as we want? Any resources, anything that we need to create the unimaginable economy with the well-being and welfare for everyone, as much as everyone wants. What about that? So it is impossible to imagine such a thing if you don't have a new cosmological view on the world, on the universe. And this is what the infinitism tries to establish, tries to suggest. The idea that there is a limitlessness, endlessness in the universe, concretely in the matter, and if we know the structure of matter, we will find there the infinitude, and this infinitude is a material reality in the structure of any phenomenon that we can use in order to obtain everything we want. So the infinitism is based on the idea of the manipulation of the fabric of matter, but we cannot do this manipulation with what we are doing as the normal evolution of science and technology as we did. If we go with this momentum, we won't have enough time to, in the one hand, get everything we want, and on the other hand, keeping, the Earth and the global environment, enough and continuing enough to get the first one. So if we go with this momentum, if we go with this logic and with this approach that we have right now, we will use and deplete all the resources of the earth before getting to this special level of the advance in the civilization and in the technology, in the science, in order to, have everything we want without creating a natural disaster on the earth. We cannot have, with this momentum, with this approach, with this view. That's why we need, as it's said in the book, a different cosmology, entirely different cosmology. And infinitism is suggesting that by making a very simple proposal. Let's see how we can first know, how we can take knowledge of the infinitude in the fabric of matter, in the structure of matter, and second, how we can intervene in this infinitude, right, in order to master it or to modify it, to alter it in such a way that we can transform the different matter in what we want and as much as we want. How we can do that? So there are two questions. First, how we can get enough the theoretical knowledge about the infinity, and the second, how we can develop the practical and operative knowledge for changing and modifying the structure of matter, the structure in which the infinity is going on forever, and by this continuation it's giving us the endless opportunities to intervene and to do what we want. The desired changes, the changes that will bring about what we need. So that's why when I am reading this paragraph, of the book, where Dr. Feyerabend is talking about the entirely different cosmology, I understand what he is saying. Why? Because we are doing it in the frame of the infinitism, the philosophical theory of infinitism. Now, the material which the scientist has at his disposal, his most sublime theories and his most sophisticated techniques included, is structured in exactly the same way, right? So there is a kind of similarity between the methodology that we can use to suggest a different cosmology and the methodology that the scientists are using, right? So it again contains principles which are not known and which, if known, would be extremely hard to test, right? Like the suggestion that we are doing, the main suggestion of the infinitism, according to which there are in the universe the infinite possibilities to produce whatever we want, how much we want, how many we want. So there are always and always endless possibilities. How we can test that is extremely hard to test, as the text says, right? So what's the result? Look, the result is this. As a result, a theory may clash with the evidence, not because it is not correct, but because the evidence is contaminated. Look, when we say that the resources are endless, That's the blue-minding, you know. So what does it mean? How the resources can be endless? We have been always and always told, not only in our education, but in our history, in our intellectual history, scientific history, that everything, every single thing has an end. How it would be possible to imagine, to conceive the matter as an endless source of production for everything we want? How we can imagine that? So the question is not because it is not correct what we are suggesting as assumption, but because the evidence is contaminated, because our mind is already contaminated with the idea of, you know, ending reality, not endless reality, limited sources, not limitless sources. So that's why you see how the things are coming up when we are reading this book, and at the same time when we are familiar more or less with the idea of the infinitism. That's why I recommend you to read this book, to see the other presentations that we have, in order to get an idea about the main concept, the central suggestion of the infinitism, and then to see how the lecture of this book could effectively come along with what we are suggesting there. Now, let's keep going. Now, how can we possibly examine something we are using all the time? You know, we had said all the time that there are a limited resources for what we want to use as the natural resources, for example. How we can examine the absence of resources in that, right? How can we analyze the terms in which we habitually express our most simple and straightforward observation and reveal their presupposition? How we can do that? That's the main challenge of infinitism, really. So that's why it's very interesting to see what would be the suggestion or the solution suggested by the Professor Feyerabend, in order to have an idea about how we can effectively use his suggestion or his solution for what we want to do as the framework of the Infinitylogy that can help us to support the main theory of the infinitism. How can we discover the kind of word we presuppose when proceeding as we do? You know, so these are the main questions that should help us to get us free, get us released from all the cliches, all the chains that we had put in our mind, and is creating a kind of glass seal, you know, invisible seal over our heads. So that's why we should be able to go beyond that. Look at the answer. The answer is clear. We cannot discover it from the inside. What does it mean? We need an external standard of criticism. We need a set of alternative assumptions, or as these assumptions will be quite general, constituting, as it were, an entire alternative world. We need a dream world. Look, we need a dream world in order to discover the features of the real world. Which real world? The real world we think we inhabit. We think. And he adds, and which may actually be just another dream world. So what we could consider as the real world and the dream world can easily interchange their places if we are able to do so, if we are able to get a view from outside of this ideological box we created and in which we are prisoner. If this view comes from an external standard of criticism, we will be able to criticize the so-called evidences of what we have inside, right? And in this way, we will be able to create a dream world, and this dream world that we suggested in the infinitism, according to which there is no any limitation for anything we want, and we means every single individual on the earth, So this dream world, where everything is possible, where everything is available, should be constructed in order to understand how miserable, right, is our life, how petty is the world in which we are living. This is the idea. What's the first step? Let's refer to the text. The first step in our criticism of familiar concepts and procedures, the first step in our criticism of facts must therefore be an attempt to break the circle. There is a circle, there is a kind of vicious circle, closed circle in which we are taken, we are grasped, we are trapped. And for that, we should be able to criticize the concept, the ideas, the notions, the procedure, the beliefs, in order to start to break this circle. So what we have to do, alternatively, we must invent a new conceptual system that suspends or clashes with the most carefully established observational results. Right? Look at how we need courage to do so. How we should have this intellectual courage to dare that, right? But this is the way. This is a methodological recommendation. It's not an ideological one. We should be able to invent a new conceptual system. And this new conceptual system could be so different, so weird, so new, so original, that can suspend or clash with the most carefully. These are our habits, these are our cliché, these are our freeze ideas, the most carefully established observational results. And what else? It can confound the most plausible theoretical principles, which means the most obvious, the evidences, right? And also it can introduce perceptions that cannot form part of the existing perceptual world, which means we can suggest the perceptions that go beyond the existing perceptual world. This is what we did in the infinitism. We are talking about a world in which everyone is able to have anything he or she wants, as much as he wants, as many as we want, and everyone is able to transform his will into reality. So this degree of civilization that gives us the possibility of transformation of our idea, our desire, our will into concrete projects, this is a new perception of the world. This is a new perception of man. This is a new perception of life. So instead of stagnating in a world that is the most stupid world that we could imagine, when we take knowledge, when we take acquaintance of all the possibilities that we are missing, that we are neglecting. Why? Because of our vision, because of our worldview, because of our falsified worldview on the reality, because of the manipulated vision that we have on the real world. A world in which the material universe, is giving us anything we want, and in the measures, in the quantities that are beyond any imagination, but everything is there, everything is ready to be used, and we are missing that. Why? Because we put glasses in front of our eyes that deform everything, denature everything, and we cannot see this opportunity. We cannot these immense resources that are waiting for us, and that's why we miss that, and that's why we are in this misery life that we have. So this step is again counter-inductive. Counter-induction is therefore always reasonable, and it has always a chance of success. See? Counter-induction is always reasonable, and because it's reasonable, it has always a chance of success. So we know that in the following chapter, there are 7 chapters that will follow, this conclusion will be developed in greater detail, and it will be elucidated with the help of what? Historical example. We will exit from the purely conceptual debate, and we will touch a lot of historical examples. One might therefore get the impression that I recommend a new methodology which replaces induction by counter-induction and uses a multiplicity of theories, metaphysical views, fairy tales, instead of the customary per theory observation. You see, so Professor Feyerabend is very consistent with what he is suggesting and what he is doing himself, right? So he is suggesting us to not be a prisoner of the pure theory observation, which means the classic vision of science, and at the same time he is giving us a demonstration of another alternative, which is the replacing induction by counter-induction, right? And suggesting the different theories, metaphysical views, fairy tales, and see how we can use them. So, he says, this impression would certainly be mistaken. My intention is not to replace one set of general rules by another such set. So, why? Because he thinks that doing so is counterproductive. So, what is his intention? His intention is rather to convince the reader that all methodologies, even the most obvious ones, have their limits. You see? So, we have been used to believe in the righteousness, in the functionality of one theory, and he is telling us that whatever is the theory, whatever is the methodology that you are using, as much as scientific it is, as many as observations that you applied in your methodology, don't forget that any methodology has its limits. So the best way to show this is to demonstrate the limits and even the irrationality of some rules which she or he is likely to regard as basic, right? So we will see in the following chapter the demonstration of the idea that a lot of things in which we believed had been false, had been irrational, right? What we considered as rules could be also as irrational as you can imagine, as limited as you can imagine. So, in the case of induction, including induction by falsification, this means demonstrating how well the counter-inductive procedure can be supported by argument, right? Just by argument. And he is telling us, look, in the case of induction, and sometimes we have the induction by falsification, this means demonstrating how well the counterproductive procedure can be supported by arguments. So which means that argument is not the monopoly of the science, is not monopoly of the induction, but also the counter-induction can use arguments, right? Always remember that the demonstrations and the rhetorics used do not express any deep convictions of mine. So which means that even when he will be demonstrate historical example or different rhetorics, he doesn't want to get any deep convictions, right? Which means that the demonstration remains open. The demonstration could be flexible, and we don't have to get a single conclusion from that, right? Why? Because they merely show how easy it is to lead people by the nose in a rational way, right? So you give a rational appearance to your argument and the people will follow you. While an anarchist is like an undercover agent who plays the game of reason. Why? In order to undercut the authority of reason, right? So, this is the task of an anarchist, to come in your game, to play your game in order to show how your game is shallow, how your game is shaky, how your game sometimes is unfounded or irrational. And this is what the epistemological anarchism is trying to demonstrate, to prove, right? Regarding the question like truth, honesty, justice, and so on. That's the idea of this book. So we finish here the chapter 2, and from the next video we will go over the next chapter, chapter 3. Before going to see what is the summary of the chapter 3, I would like to make a conclusion from the chapter 2 to say this. When it comes to improve the human conditions. We should never be shy, or shameful to shake the foundation of what we already have. Because what we already have doesn't have anything very special, anything that we can be really proud of. We have millions and millions of people who are suffering, billions of people who died during the history with war, and lots of our disease and the situation that we created, like the slavery, for example. So there are very, very little points we could be absolutely proud of during our history. On the contrary, the things, the events, and the realities that are completely shameful are many and many. So that's why, in order to change it, to a better thing, to turn it into a better world, we should be able to put in question a lot of things that we considered always as obvious, and we can see that it's not as obvious as you can see. So that's why I think at present, more than any time else in our life, in our personal, social, and professional lives, we need really to assert, to affirm the intellectual bravery, right? To show our intellectual courage. Why? Because it's only if we demonstrate this intellectual courage that we can break the barriers, the conventional and institutional barriers. And then we can effectively put in question a lot of things that the dominant system tries to show as obvious, as unchangeable, as unshakable, while they are completely changeable. And we can shake that. We can see that in the history of societies, in the human histories in general, and in the history of philosophy or history of science in particular, we have always the people who were able to suggest the ideas that revolutionized the history, the societies, the science, the philosophy, the intellectual life of the mankind. So, if we have any progress, if we have any advances in philosophy and science, it's because of this kind of people, those who showed the intellectual bravery, intellectual courage. And that's why we should be able to do so. As to myself, I try to do it with the infinitism, and I think there are interesting potentials in this theory in order to upside down, a irrational and inhuman system, inhuman structure. And then, if we have effectively this worldview, if we are equipped with this philosophical vision on the world, we would be able to reconstruct it, to build a new world up, right? And to create a new civilization, a civilization in which there wouldn't be any suffering anymore, no people, no living being will be suffering. Imagine a sufferance-free world. Is it possible? Yes, absolutely possible. If we dare, think differently. If we have this intellectual courage to go beyond the obvious false assertion we have been trained for, we have been educated with, and then if we show that we are able to think out of all the boxes. Thank you for watching this video. Next time we will go through the chapter 3. Let's see what could be the main idea from now, just to have a little preparation regarding this chapter 3. The summary is following. The consistency condition which demands that new hypotheses agree with accepted theories is unreasonable because it preserves the older theory and not the better theory, right? Question of consistency, condition of consistency. So, hypotheses contradicting well-confirmed theories give us evidence that cannot be obtained in any other way, right? These are the innovative hypotheses, right? And that's why we should think about other ways. Proliferation of theories is beneficial for science, while uniformity impairs its critical power. How we should avoid this idea of the uniformity. That could be even harmful for the science, for our society, for our future. Uniformity also endangers the free development of the individual. All right? So you can see that there would be a very exciting ideas in the chapter 3, and we will start in the next presentation the lecture of this chapter, and we go over the different interesting details and points. Thank you very much for watching this video, and see you next time. Bye.